Guacamelee is a side-scrolling platformer game with elements of Metroidvania mixed in. You play as Juan, who stumbles upon a luchador mask and must become the hero to stop Carlos Calaca, who has kidnapped El Presidente's daughter. The game is set in a luchador/Mexican culture setting. It's pretty engrossing overall, and I really enjoyed the way they designed it. You'll run into famous Mexican folklore, like chupacabras, and the story is told through a series of text without any voiceover narration, and while it's not super engrossing, it's enough to really string the game together as a whole. You'll have a ton of different bosses and characters you'll run into that feel like their own individual entities, that really flesh out the world and make it feel alive. It definitely leans very heavily on the comedic side of storytelling, with characters often blurting out or doing random things for hilarity's sake, and as a result, I can really recommend it for people who are looking for a more comedic aspect of storytelling rather than a serious one. The gameplay is like what you would expect in a Metroidvania game. You've got a huge world with all sorts of different locations that you'll explore as you uncover different missions and objectives to do. They're all wonderfully detailed and really feel alive, with individual uniqueness that really makes them exciting. Combat is fairly straightforward. It definitely relies a bit on a combo system, but it is pretty simple for the most part. You've got all sorts of different basic attacks, like punching upward to launch enemies up, punching downward and slamming down, or punching forward. You've also got different abilities like headbutting and charging at enemies and knocking them in the air and going down pile driver style onto enemies. These add different ways that you can combo and string things together. Like, for example, you could attack forward, then punch an enemy up in the air, and then come back down on top of them. This gives you an interesting way to do more damage while adding a bit of skill to it. As you progress, you also gain access to new abilities like double jumping or flying or being able to hold onto walls or moving up walls. And you also have access to coins that you can be used to purchase new skins, which allow you to get different bonuses for different things, like if I want to tailor my build towards something in particular. You can also purchase upgrades like more health or damage or stamina. There's also a fairly decent enemy variety. You'll fight different types of skeletons, these giant things, and also bird creatures like chupacabras. Guacamelee's biggest problem is that the difficulty curve in this game is just completely out of whack. Most of the bosses are pretty easy in this game, and the first 2/3 of the game feel completely like a breeze. Just you'll be breezing through any kind of puzzles or enemies you run into. It's that remaining 1/3 where the game really comes into its own. You'll be using all sorts of different abilities and have to solve all different sorts of different puzzles that feel unique and interesting. As a result, it kind of feels like the beginning of the game is more of a tech demo, and I was a little bit bored for that first half of the game as a result. Guacamelee also has up to 4 players co-op, and the sound is something I really enjoyed about this game. It's got a great Mexican vibe to it that really pulls you into some memorable tracks. As a whole, Guacamelee will take about 5 to 7 hours to play through, just enough to feel satisfying while not overstaying its welcome. Overall, Guacamelee is a solid game that feels a bit poorly designed. The combat is pretty fun, it is a little bit easy at the beginning, and the world is fairly engrossing, but the difficulty and progression of the game is just where all of it falls apart. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense because that first half of the game is very boring because there's not a lot of challenge. You'll be breezing through enemies and monsters, and it's really not until that remaining third of the game that it really starts to ramp up in difficulty and feel like the game is actually coming together as it brings all of its different abilities and mechanics together to create an interesting and compelling experience. And as a result, I felt like Guacamelee gets a 7 out of 10. It's just okay, a little bit above average, but it's not quite there to greatness. I would still recommend playing it because it is a fairly short game at only about 5 to 7 hours, so it definitely doesn't overstay its welcome. It's something you can definitely complete in one sitting if you're really into that.